Can you do AP automation natively within Acumatica? If not, will this be available at any stage? Over to you, Mari-Liis. And I could potentially just add to that at the end of your response.
I believe it's coming, and maybe Stephen, you can help me with a little bit of those dates that people are usually not so good at giving.
Yes. So just to explain, there has been a fair bit of work that's being done at MYOB in terms of the release of a number of AI and ML services required to support the new AI-based functionality that's being introduced by Acumatica. As you can imagine, a lot of this is platform-based. It's actually about making sure that the foundations are in place for all the plumbing that's required by MYOB to support this. The OCR type functionality, the native AP OCR functionality was introduced by Acumatica probably about 2 years ago now. Of course, MYOB is a little bit behind in terms of their release cycle. But what this has really just prompted is a lot of work around the engineering of the platform to support not only OCR, but the upcoming AI and ML functionality that's being introduced within the Acumatica platform overall. We are expecting that sort of within the next 9 to 12 months. We should have James on the phone shortly to hopefully give us a little bit of an update on that. So watch this space, Mari-Liis. All right, next question. How could payroll and the assigner application integrate with Acumatica? Now,
Okay.
this is a little bit off the cuff. I believe within assigner, what we're doing is capturing timesheets. So do you want to maybe just talk to that process by which we can have Acumatica payroll supporting a timesheet integration with an external application such as Assigner, and how that process flows in terms of external time capture?
I think there's probably two ways that you can look at this. Either the assigner or whichever outside system you're using for your timesheets would create a flat file. That flat file would then be imported by the user into our timesheet. I want to even call it sort of like a staging table, if I can call it that. They would map the data and then open payroll and import those timesheets into the payroll. Alternatively, depending on the system, you could have an API integration, and that obviously makes it even easier because there's no flat file to pick up. It's the API integration. It still goes through our timesheets area staging table so that you can map the data to our employees and our pay items, and then you'll import them into payroll.
Fantastic. All right, now one for you, Mari-Liis. Does Acumatica have a native warehouse management solution that can be used with scanners? And perhaps you can talk to this initially, and I might just also add a little bit of context as well.
Can I call Nick for help?
Phone a friend.
Phone a friend on this one.
Yep, that's not a problem at all.
Savage-Mady.
Yeah, so from the point of view of MYOB Acumatica, it does have like a native WMS system to be able to handle certain aspects, but it depends on what's actually needed, and we can do things like transferring and receipting and shipping within the system, but you tend to find that there's better option of there's a add-on called Evexo, which actually allows to do a lot more and a lot more user-friendly type app for those kind of processes. So I tend to find that helps from that point of view. And yeah, so I'm going to say there is one natively, but I just tend to find that something like Evexo, which is a bit of a better option, is also available on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic, that's great. All right, another question here, and this might be one that you might also want to jump in on, Nick, given your manufacturing experience. How do we keep the costs of a multi-layer bill of materials up to date so we know the total cost of a manufactured item during the opportunity stage?
That is a good question. If you're using the manufacturing module, then you've got the option of whatever you've previously purchased items for should flow through, and that should roll up the cost for when you're actually looking at what the cost of that full bill of materials actually is. Or alternatively, depending on what cost type you're using on your product, if it's using standard cost, then that can also roll up, and you can import in whatever the current cost is and that standard cost, and then roll that up and then find the price out from that side of things. That's one option. Yeah.
Maybe just expanding on that, there's a number of approaches here. Of course, the estimate functionality within the manufacturing edition is also really useful if you've got a lot of variability in terms of bill of materials.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit hard to, not 100% sure where that question's coming from, but certainly the estimates function might be better if you're trying to manage varying costs and varying sub-assemblies. Of course, whole issue with manufacturing costing is just a big point that we're not going to get into, because all of the accountants in the room might actually have slightly varying opinions on the best approach. But typically, standard costing would be the approach that you'd be taking in terms of your multi-layer bill of materials in terms of sub-assemblies. And so you're actually only refreshing your costs on the basis of when you do a standard cost change. Anyway, I'm not going to go any deeper than that. Now, another question here for you, Julia. Can generic inquiries be used in workforce management?
No. However, all the information that is in workforce management does flow down to payroll and Acumatica on a whole. So anything that's in Acumatica that comes from workforce management, then of course you can create generic inquiries. There are quite a few reports in workforce management, and I do know that that product is growing at an exponential rate. So who knows what they're going to do, but all that information is available in Acumatica, and we all know the GIs there are very, very strong.
Very good. All right, another question for you here. And I might pass this one to you, Nick, if I can. Is there a facility for bulk item replenishment changes? For example, reviewing, changing replenishment quantities, replenishment type, or supply warehouses?
I knew you were going to ask that one. I just had it on my screen. So in terms of the bulk item replenishment, so within the system, it's got the ability to set it up to say, right, based on the last 6 months, last 12 months, or last couple of quarters, can you suggest what replenishment settings should be? And the system can actually suggest for you what it thinks, those changes are going to be for reorder points and so on and so forth. So you can use that that's already within the system. Alternatively, there's a couple of other options that you can use. So you could push the data out into Excel and feed data back in via import scenarios and remodel it that way. Or you could, again, push things out into Excel and use something like Velexo to push back in as well. So there are options of what's natively within the system versus actually modeling everything for yourself externally, or using the import scenarios to actually update figures and push back in for you.
Just adding to that, depending upon the design of your warehouse environment, if you're using hub and spoke, or if you have discrete warehouses where you are holding stock, some of the new DRP functionality might actually contribute towards how you could address some of those concerns. If you're trying to make sort of more granular changes based on short lead time type decisions. All right, another question here, and I might just hand this one over to you, Nick. How do we handle non-stock items that we purchase from a supplier?
Well, you do have the ability to actually, on a non-stock item, actually say, whether you receipt it or whether you ship it. So you've got those options. So you can raise a purchase order with those options if you want to, or you can simply just create a non-stock item, create a purchase order, and then create a bill from that point of view directly from that. So quite simple.
Fantastic.
Yep.
And maybe just add to that, I think the particular example that one was in terms of purchasing of, for example, firmware, where it actually isn't a physical item.
Yeah.
It's a virtual item. It's a key that we still actually need to sell and potentially track. The serial number tracking might also come into that one as well. Did you want to add anything further around that, Nick?
Yeah, if it is something like that, so it's got a serial number against it, then potentially it should be held as a actual stock item, to be honest. So you may want to set it up as a stock item with serial tracking, and then at least you know when it comes in, what's been then passed out to the relevant customer. And I believe going forward, there is also potentially where you can convert non-stock items into stock items for items that you now want to actually stock as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. And one more for you, Nick. Obviously, you're having a popular day today.
I know, yeah.
How do we get the most out of using the work center schedule in conjunction with MRP exceptions?
So that is so from an MRP point of view, I would say that depending on how you actually set up the bill of materials on the actual manufacturing item, that then determines when the MRP runs, it will then know if we're going to create this bill of materials, these are the work centers we need, and then that factors into it what it's going to actually use for the dates for when it can actually be produced from that point of view. And also lead times on the products as well, kind of factor into it as well.
Okay, fantastic. A little bit of a note in terms of the way in which the online attendee is using Assigner. They're actually using Assigner to collect customer charges and all of the details against dockets. So time is actually being approved essentially as a part of the docket production. Essentially what we would look at doing in terms of the integration is at the end of the day, we're still dealing with time, although it's time approved from a docket. We probably need to get into a bit more detail around that integration, but I expect on the basis of that time that's been captured, approved on the docket, we look at doing an import of that time via the timecode import process into Acumatica payroll and then paying staff off that. There may be a requirement around sort of some award interpretation. I'm assuming this is the construction industry. There might be some requirements around award interpretation, in which case it might be sort of look at workforce management. But I'm sure James can give us a bit of an update in terms of where we're at with workforce management and the potential impact on the construction industry as well. So we might just leave that one there. And welcome, James.
Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Very, very well. Can I hit you up with a audience question, please?
Yeah, sure. I can always give that a go.
When does MYOB Acumatica plan to integrate AI assistance for users? Will there be a focus on design or coding assistance for things like GIs and customizations?
So there's a whole lot of things around AI that we're going to be focusing on during the course of 2025. So watch the space. You'll be seeing a lot of things coming through in 2025. In terms of GIs, that is going to be a little bit longer around that. There's a lot of focus being made on how to just make it easier to create GIs from a usability perspective. So that is not a direct focus from a AI perspective right now. It will come. In terms of being able to create customizations, I got to be honest, I'm not a coder. I wrote a customization thanks to ChatGPT. Okay, so it actually, just going into things like ChatGPT, it already does understand some of the requirements around being able to create customizations associated to that.
We just add in one thing to that, of course, one of the benefits and one of the strengths of the Acumatica platform is that we are using that Microsoft .NET environment. Often we are using, Visual Studio as a tool to manage customizations. If you're using Visual Studio, you do get the benefits of GitHub Copilot and that sort of functionality in terms of providing guidance around customizations and providing guidance around all those good things that large language models can help in terms of coding and giving you guidance. So I think the answer is yes.